No.
Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha is Miketz, and we're going to talk about Hanukkah and its correlation to the Parsha. We know, what does Miketz mean? The Torah says it was after the 2 years that Yosef had to stay in the prison. For 12 years, Yosef was in prison. Finally, he came out of the pit. Because, you know, the prisons were underground in the olden days. It was a dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And Yosef becomes so great. He has a meteoric rise to greatness. On one hand, for the previous 12 years, he was in the dump. He was in a dungeon. Now he becomes the greatest man in Egypt. The only man greater than him in Egypt is what? Paro himself. Paro goes as far to say everything done in Egypt has to go according to the advice and instructions of who? Yosef. So we see Yosef has a meteoric rise. And the Zohar says, what does Miketz mean? Ketzam lachoshech. There's a passage in Iyov that says that you should know there's always an end to light, to darkness. The Zohar goes on to say that Ketz is the name of the Satan, because the Satan tries to make us sin, tries to make us lose hope, and then it goes and is the attorney, categor, and tells God, oh, Ketz means the end. So the Satan, by making us sin and then going and being the prosecutor in the heavenly court, wants to make God to end our lives, God forbid. But the Zohar says, the greatness of Yosef and something, especially after what happened in San Bernardino and what happened in France within the last few weeks, we should know. A Jew must never lose hope. The light of God, we're right here in the lights of Hanukkah, of the menorah, the greatness and grace of God, the blessing of God, the light of the Shekhinah has no limit. But never forget, as bad as any situation could get, as bad as the Holocaust was, there's light in the end of the tunnel. After that, we got the state of Israel, which is now really the first steps of Mashiach. And this is the correlation between this week's Parsha and Yosef. I want you to imagine, 12 years is a long time to be in a dungeon. But Yosef, throughout all those years, he was actually thrown into a pit twice. Once by his own brothers, once by his master, Potiphar. But throughout all Yosef's difficulties, he never gave up hope. Because he knew that was light at the end of the tunnel. And when sometimes in life we're overwhelmed. Everything seems to go wrong. We think, oh, from the beginning of this month to the end of this month, nothing goes my way. The worst mistake we could make is to lose hope. And that's really the message of Hanukkah. The whole prayer of Al Hanisim is saying what? Is saying, we were so few compared to this gigantic, enormous Greek army. This is the same army. It was the Syrian Greeks, but they're the same affiliated with Alexander the Great. So it was a really magnificent and powerful army. The Maccabees were outnumbered. They didn't have any advanced weapons. They didn't have any advanced training how to be soldiers. They were priests, like rabbis. But they knew if they fight for God, they're never going to lose. They knew that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And the interesting thing about Hanukkah is the war of Hanukkah against the dark, evil Greeks, and the war for light, the battle for freedom and liberty, it lasted more than 20 years. Did you know that? But through those 20 years that the Jews were fighting for the light of the menorah to bring light into the world, they never gave up hope. Just like Yosef, the 12 years that he was in the dungeon, the 20 years that he was away from his father, he always knew that God would reunite him with his father, and God will never forsake the righteous. There's always light in the end of the tunnel. And that's why Ben Ish Chai says, we know, a halacha, on Shabbat when we light the lights, we say, Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh. But when we light the menorah, where do we say? Lahadlik ner Chanukah. We don't say what? Shel. You know why?
Why?
Because according to Kabbalah, one of the holy names of God is Nachal. And when we say Lahadlik Lamed Ner Chanukah, it comes out to the name of what? Nachal. Nachal is the same words that King David says in Tehillim 33. Nafshenu chikta la Hashem. Why did God make a miracle for the Maccabees? Because Nafshenu chikta la Hashem. Nachal. They knew they had faith and trust that God will make a miracle for them. They knew that this fight is worth fighting, because ultimately Satan, evil, Greek, all of these things have a limit. The light of Mashiach, the light of blessing, has no limit. So when we fight for what's right, ultimately we will prevail. And just to bring you, one of my students, congregants, he's going through a nasty divorce. He's going through his business just closed down. Sometimes in life, it's so easy and almost inevitable for us to give up hope, to get depressed. But let's be like Yosef, that knew that ultimately God will raise him from the dungeon. And like the Maccabees, that they knew ultimately light will prevail. And let us never become full of despair and depression, because this Satan and evil and terrorism and anything harmful, it's just there to give us reward, for us to fight and deserve for reward. We talk about it in another video, but it has a limit. It's going to be put to an end, and hopefully all the evil and darkness and terrorism, its end will come very soon, and we will see the Kohen Gadol light the menorah for us. Shabbat Shalom, happy Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbat Shalom.